Hi, folks. With Tacitus today. Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the life that an African tribal man had to look forward to. And I'll just pick the year 1700. I mean, I could pick, I don't know, 1740 or something, but just picking the baseline of 1700. Now, the estimated number of slaves in Africa at the time, this is pretty much all over Africa, the number of slaves is estimated as being roughly equivalent to the sort of 50% of the population. So you've got one half of the population enslaving the other half. So, and this was pretty dynamic in the sense that the raids and the petty tribal warfare and so on meant that constant raids were going on in the middle of the night and so on, that where you'd be donged on the head with a wooden club and then dragged off, or so you could end up being enslaved. Then another tribe would have war with that thing, the other tribe would enslave you, and you'd go back and forth. So it seems like there was a lot of crossover where your slave status could change, to a different African tribe, sort of day to day almost. So unless you were a prince, or a regional warlord or something like that, that was your lot in life. Now, if you weren't killed in the petty tribal battles or you weren't sacrificed, you were going to be enslaved. The chances of you not being enslaved outside of royalty, the chances of you not being enslaved during your life, which was short and brutish, chances of not being enslaved were pretty slim. The idea that anybody would not be enslaved, not being enslaved was the unusual sort of part of things. But being enslaved was the natural status. That was the natural organic status of things in Africa, and had been for thousands of years, by the way. It wasn't something that began 5 minutes ago. Now, so you've got Africans enslaving on the other side, the Arabs, particularly on the east coast of Africa, and particularly around the north and northeastern aspect. The Arabs were very much the big slavers and slave traders of the day. Now, hardly any black people survive. Given the millions of slaves that based on documentation, many millions, 10 million plus Africans that were enslaved by the Arab slavers. Hardly any Africans have survived. There's some mixing with the Arab populations in northeast Africa, in the parts of Eritrea, that sort of thing. But because they castrated all the males, and any children that were born of black concubines were killed, then it meant that there's no surviving blacks to talk about. So now many of the black men that were castrated, it was pretty sort of casual type medical practices, as you can imagine. A lot of them died from infections from the half-assed castration process. It was just a knife and snipping up. So there was a lot of casualties there. A lot of the black people died being brought over the desert areas, from where they were taken in Africa. Again, now the Arabs were different. The Arabs did go grabbing, rando grabbing back, but primarily the Arab slaving was, again, they were procuring slaves from other African tribes. So it's black people enslaving each other again, and then selling them to the Arabs. Now the Arabs kind of paid very much, so I don't know what it was like, but if the Arabs could afford 50, 60, 70% casualties, either from thirst and all this sort of stuff going across the desert, botched castration operations, all these sorts of things. If they could afford that level of which they seem to have accepted without batting an eye, then they can't have been paying very much to get these slaves. If you didn't stay alive and you'd managed to make it to wherever the Arabic thing, you'd be again, you're treated brutishly and harshly, and would you'd be lucky to make it to your 30s. So, and there's no blacks living today, so every one of them was, again, died, castrated, and so on. They had no intention of creating black families where blacks would get together and procreate to use, to keep the slave line going. So, again, the Arabs, given how much time and effort they put into procuring slaves, they can't have paid very much. Either that or the prices for African slaves must have been through the roof in the Arabic areas, which would seem unlikely as far as I can tell. Anyway, so you've got the blacks enslaving each other, the likelihood of dying young and living a short, brutal, beastly life, and the Arab option. Now you come to the third option. Now remember, you're going to be enslaved either way. The idea that you won't be enslaved is almost zero. Someone's going to enslave you. That was your lot as the tribal African man at the time. So then you get the issue of you're already being enslaved by the blacks, but then the black people are going to, your other blacks are going to sell you to these white dudes that are going to take you somewhere, across the oceans. And as a very simple tribal peasant, you've got no concept of this. The only world you know is really your village and then the village next to it. The idea of vast oceans and places across the you can barely conceive of something like that. So anyway, your black, other blacks are selling you to these white guys, and these white guys are going to take you to these other places, the Caribbean, or, North America, and so on. Now, if you had a choice on which form, because you're going to be enslaved either way, which form of slavery you want, you'd pick the North American, maybe the Caribbean to slightly less extent, but certainly that you'd pick the North American slaver status. You're going to be a slave anyway, so which one do you pick? And you'd pick that one. Now the difference is that, unlike the Arabs that want to castrate you and kill you off young, unlike the Africans that they're going to work you into the ground, beat you, deprive you of food, and kill you, and all that. Other than that, the difference is the white people, the white slave owners, they want you to stay alive. They want you to be fit and healthy and ready to work. They want to give you medical attention. They want to give you nutritious food. They want to give you shelter. They want to give you clothing that keeps you warm in the cooler weather. They want you alive and working, and they want to keep you in good condition. They don't want you dying young. You're of no use. You can't. If you die, you can't work. So they want to keep you alive, and they then as you get older, maybe you can't work. Get rheumatism or something. You can't work in the fields. Doing the agricultural hard yards. Then other work is found for you to work. Stay in the village around the huts, maybe making the food, looking after children, because they're openly, these white people, they want you to procreate, and so someone has to be in looking after the children, and while the people are out, younger people are out working in the fields. And there's a lot of black people being trained to do basic carpentry work, or looking after the horses, milking the cows, planting, like keeping their own vegetable gardens and planting your crops, and so on and so forth, baking bread, I don't know, a whole lot of things that they would never have learned or found out about in Africa. Now also other work, bending fences and I don't know, digging irrigation ditches or something. There's a whole lot of things that skills and exposure to white man's technology they would never have come across in Africa. Remember, in Africa, they've got no written language and they haven't even discovered the wheel, for goodness sakes. So they're thousands of years technologically behind white society. So they've come into a much more advanced society, and they're working for people that want them to stay fit, healthy, and alive, want them to have families, want them to procreate, want them to acquire skills so they can do things that around the farm and the plantation and so on. So this is a very different life. No one's trying to kill you. No one's trying to starve you. Now you may get beaten if you try and run away and cause trouble or something. That's there. But otherwise, the plantation owners and the farmers, they want you fit, healthy, and alive. They want you with a wife or a consort. They want you procreating. They want the kids to be healthy. If you're having trouble in childbirth, the white guys will bring a doctor for you to help. All these sorts of things. So if you had a choice, and that's your choice, those are the only choices you've got as a black man in 1700s in Africa. Those are you would every time you would pick the white man as the slave every time. And I think we need to talk about that a bit more. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.